Well, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here, and I want to thank the South Dakota State University Department of Journalism and Mass Communications, and especially Lyle for showing us around today and being such a wonderful host, and also the South Dakota World Affairs Council for a wonderful meal, and of course the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, who made this project possible. We first came upon this story in November of 2012. Yunfan and I were both working for the Asia Society, and we found ourselves traveling to a rural village in Anhui Province. Coal Plus Ice is a documentary photography exhibition that we were producing for the Asia Society, looking at the consequences of climate change on the Himalayas. It had been invited to exhibit at the photography festival in rural Anhui Province. The photo festival was part of a much larger event, the Bishan Harvestival, which was organized by two successful Beijing-based curators who had recently purchased homes in Bishan village, and who were there experimenting with ways to reinvigorate rural life. Logistically, the exhibit proved a daunting feat. The power of 10 men would carry 15 massive crates 500 meters down a rocky hill to the exhibition space. The exhibition space was this amazing ancestral hall that dates to the Ming Dynasty. We had to calculate how much electricity our exhibition would use so that we could borrow it from the farm next door. 5 villagers became our art handlers. Here's 4 of them. We had only 1 week to install, and on the day before the opening, we had two hours left of work ahead of us. The local government canceled the whole festival. Or, in their words, indefinitely postponed. The first Harvestival the previous year had also been organized by Onin and Zojing, these two Beijing-based curators, and had been quite successful. They had brought artists and intellectuals from all across China to celebrate rural life. This is Onin at the welcome ceremony the first year, and this is Bishan village having a film screening at the festival. The second Harvestival that we were in attendance at had expanded in its ambition, inviting many international guests. By the time of the cancellation, many participants and guests had already arrived or were en route over the Pacific. And so an underground festival continued in the cancellation's wake. There was a pig roast and performances by a Kunchu opera troupe from Jiangsu province. Here you can see Abigail Washburn, a Nashville-based Mandarin-speaking banjo player, performing with Wu Tiaoren, a Guangzhou-based duo who play guitar and accordion and sing in their local Haifeng dialect. Originally, a whole series of films on American agriculture had been planned, but we were still able to see Sweetgrass by Elisa Barbash, who had arrived in Bishan before the cancellation. Her film follows cowboys in their last season of herding sheep through the mountains of Montana. You should check it out if you haven't. Back at our photo exhibition, the local government had barricaded the front door, but we snuck some people in through the side entrance. We were impressed by the resilience of the participants and the organizers, and in that moment, we knew we had found something interesting. And so soon after, we applied to the Pulitzer Center for a grant, and we've been following this story ever since. I'll now turn it over to Yunfan to give some history of the region.
This is a map of China, and as you can see on the top, blue line represents the Yellow River, and the middle one is the Yangtze River, and the bottom one is the Pearl River. And today, Bishan village locates in Anhui, rural Anhui province, which is the orange area. But historically, Bishan is located in this yellow area, which is actually part of today's Anhui province and part of today's Jiangxi province. And this yellow region is called Huizhou region historically. And this region become really wealthy in the 11th century. Why 11th century? That's because before that point, China's the center of Chinese civilization and the culture center, economy center, or political center were either located in the Shanxi province or Henan province in the Yellow River region. And it was only in the 11th century the Southern Song dynasty built its capital in the Yangtze River Delta, where near Shanghai there's a city called Hangzhou. And Huizhou region just so luckily, situated next to Hangzhou, and it becomes this resource center that provided supply for this construction of this new capital. So Huizhou provided timber, silk, craftsmen, and food for the new capital. And since then, for the following 600 years, Huizhou region has been really influential because the merchants coming out from this Huizhou region, they would do business all across China. Although, in the Yuan and Ming and Qing dynasty, the capital actually located back north to Beijing. But by that time, the Huizhou merchants already dominated the whole economy system. So that's the economic history of Huizhou. Yeah, they were so successful that they eventually dominated timber, salt, ink, tea, porcelain, and pawn shops throughout China. There's even a saying that a town is not a town without Huizhou merchants. And historically, this region consists of 6 counties, and represented by these blue dots along this Xing'an River, which flows to Hangzhou. And the Yellow Mountain, the famous Yellow Mountain, is located only 50 kilometers away to the Bishan village. And pay attention to the blue dot on the top right corner. It's the Jixi County. We will see a building from that county really soon. During its heydays, from the 16th to the 18th centuries, the Huizhou region became famous for its cultured merchants who cultivated a lifestyle of refinement. The male members of a family would leave Huizhou to work as apprentices when they turn 15, and eventually they'll take over their family business across China and bring great wealth and culture back to Huizhou region. Literature and opera flourished in this region. Huizhou architecture style, stone and wood carving skills, furniture designs all become far more advanced compared to the rest of the country. And the merchants also wanted political representations, so they invested a lot in education. They built thousands of Confucius private schools in every Huizhou village and encouraged talented family members to take part in the imperial civil servants exam. So in the Ming and Qing dynasties, Huizhou supplied large numbers of high-ranking scholar officials to the imperial governments. And this is a typical Huizhou village. Huizhou style of vernacular architecture is most recognizable by its white exterior and upturned eaves and skilled stone and wood carvings throughout. These buildings are typically really tall and only have tiny windows on the outside. And the reason why they look like this is because the people who build these houses want to prevent bandits, because all the male members of the family, most time of the year, they will be working away from home, and only old people, women and children live in these houses. And these buildings are really densely located next to each other. Typically, an extended family will occupy a whole village. So a lot of these buildings actually, on the second floor, they are actually connected to each other. It's just one big family, and they all look so similar from the outside, and it's really easy to get lost in the village. So this is a building from the Jixi County I just talked about. This is a memorial arch which traditionally built to honor really high-ranking officials. And this one is to honor two family members of the Hu family, the Hu Fu and Hu Zongxian. And this is built in the Ming Dynasty. And do you remember any famous Mr. Hu in China, recent China history? Yeah, the former Chinese president Hu Jintao is actually offspring of this family. And that may be the reason why this arch still exists today. And typically all these memorial arches will be located in the entrance of the village to show off their pride. And within the village, there will be ancestral halls built to hold ceremonies in the New Year or in the wedding or in the funeral. And this one is very typical with a lot of wood carvings and an open courtyard. And this is the interior look of a vernacular house. So from the outside, you really don't see any big window and a source of light. But in the inside, there's open courtyard that prevents ventilation and lighting to each room within the building. Beginning in the 19th century, however, this region's prosperity was impaired severely, first by the Taiping Rebellion. So the Taiping Rebellion fought with the Qing Dynasty's Qing government's army, and Huizhou became a major battleground. And for some villages, 80% of the population died because of this war. So, and after that, China was invaded by so many countries, and from British to German to Russia to Hungary, and there was the civil war between the Communist Party and the National Party in the 40s. And so by the end of it, the Communist Party took power. And in the 50s, they started the Great Leap Forward reform in the rural region. And it really turned villages into communes, and land, labor, and possessions were all collectivized. Traditional farming practices were abandoned, and the region's grand merchant tradition, whatever that's left, after a century of war, is completely destroyed. Across China, these changes resulted in a manufactured famine, which resulted in the death of tens of millions of rural Chinese. And it was also during this period that the so-called scientific farming techniques were introduced by the experts from Russia. Pesticide and fertilizer, all kinds of chemicals were introduced to Chinese farmers. And then in the late 60s, Cultural Revolution started. And one of the campaigns of the Cultural Revolution was the smashing the four old elements: old habits, old culture, old customs, and old habits. So anything antique, anything to do with tradition were destroyed. That's why we don't see a lot of this grand history of Huizhou left today. The village we have been documenting in the past 2 years used to have, it's dominated by two families. One is the Wang family, one is the He family. And for Wang family alone, it used to have 36 ancestral halls built in this village. And today, there are only 3 of them left. And this is one of them. When we found them in 2013, found this one in 2013, it was on the verge of falling down. It was taken care of by this old guy here. But it really, is beyond his control. This place is used as a collective dump ground by the villagers. And he was keeping like 2 pigs and a flock of chicken in the courtyard. This whole structure was built in the Ming Dynasty, but a lot of the pillars were already starting to falling down. And this is a stone carving we found at the entrance of this ancestral hall. And it really signifies the official ranking of this who this hall was dedicated to. This tiger here in the Qing Dynasty is only used to honor fourth level imperial scholar officials. Okay, now turn to Leah for some recent history.
So as we just heard, by the end of the Cultural Revolution, so much of the tradition and architecture has totally been destroyed in this region. In the late 1970s, Deng Xiaoping began his economic liberalization campaign of reform and opening up. Here you see him at a rodeo in Houston, expressing his interest in becoming more friendly with the United States. He really wanted to lift China out of its, what he called, poverty and backwardness. Urbanization has been a center of the Communist Party's economic development plan since Deng. Today, China is 53% urban, which is a huge change for a population of 1.3 billion people. That was, as recently as 1998, 70% rural. This is the equivalent of the entire population of the United States moving from a village to a city in a matter of 16 years. And while millions of people have been lifted from poverty in the process, rapid urbanization has uprooted traditions, severed family ties, degraded the environment, overburdened urban infrastructure, and caused great social alienation and growing inequality. One of my colleagues tracks Beijing's air. Well, he tracks the air of many different cities in China and compares it to places around the world. And this is Beijing. This is actually a beautiful cityscape, but I chose to start with the bad air quality day. And here's an even worse air quality day. I wish I had the better one to show you, but it's pretty striking that you're actually supposed to be able to see many buildings in front of you here. Much of China's economic boom over the past 30 years has been limited to the big cities and coastal provinces. Anhui's per capita GDP ranked 26th among China's 31 provinces and municipalities, although its neighbors, Jiangsu and Zhejiang, rank as two of the nation's richest provinces. And so for the past few decades, residents of Anhui have been moving to nearby cities in large numbers looking for economic opportunity. Many of the villages look like ghost towns these days. Courtyard homes across the Huizhou region, once grand, now lie vacant and decrepit. It is estimated that across China, I know on the poster it said 100 villages die every day, but we actually have recently discovered it's 300 villages die every day, which sounds crazy, and we can't really fathom that, but that's actually a number out of a Chinese government research. The Chinese government is determined to keep the economy growing, and continued urbanization is a large part of this plan. They hope to be 60% urban by 2020. New York has 8.5 million residents. China already has 6 cities larger than that, with Shanghai, seen here, topping the list at 22 million people. Since these megacities are already overburdened, the Chinese government is now putting policies in place to encourage migration to smaller cities and county towns, which at last count, the almost 100 cities in China with populations between 1 and 2 million, and 35 cities with populations between 2 and 5 million. But urbanization doesn't only happen through outward migration. As cities grow, the government reclassifies rural land around the city as urban, and villages are often razed and then developed into massive high-rises. The farmers are relocated and have to find other employment options. Life in the cities for relocated farmers and migrant workers is not easy. China operates under the hukou system, a housing registration system, which divides Chinese citizens into rural and urban. Migrants make more money in the cities than they could in the villages, but without an urban hukou, they endure significant hardships. For one, they are denied access to affordable health care and education. Because of that, their children are often left behind in the village with elderly relatives. This is just one example of a grandmother and her granddaughter that we met while in Bishan. It's producing an entire generation of people known as left behind children. Migrants work long hours for little pay and have few, if any, job protections. Housing options are dilapidated and temporary, and the economic gains made in the migration from rural to urban are definitely meaningful. But the structural discrimination that they face by living outside their hukou continues to foster great inequality. Many factories and manual labor jobs do not want to hire anyone over the age of 40, and so many of the relocated farmers who didn't actually choose to go to the city but were forced to have few employment options and cannot live off the land as they were accustomed to. These are just 3 of the people we met in Bishan that are over the age of 40 and would struggle, I feel, if they were moved into an apartment complex to find a meaningful employment. So I grew up in a small town in Northern California, and I'm now living in New York City. And I have long been interested in the relationship between the countryside and the city in the United States. What happens to communities who chronically export their ambitious and educated children? Small towns across America make great effort to retain their educated children and to convince them to return home after they graduate from college. Now, I haven't been convinced yet to move home, but I do feel a great sense of pride in the small town upbringing and I'm very thankful for the values I feel it bestowed upon me. I was trying to understand this complicated relationship that we have in the United States to the agrarian tradition, seeing as we are less and less rural every day here. And I actually came across a historian from South Dakota named Gilbert C. Fite, who in the late 60s wrote this. With some 70% of Americans living in the cities, one would expect contemporary Americans to have rejected the agrarian tradition and substituted an urban philosophy more in keeping with the facts of today's American life and society. But this has not happened. Indeed, scarcely anyone sings the praises of city life or argues that urban living is a source of moral and spiritual strength for the nation. The great majority of Americans still seem to believe in the main element of the agrarian tradition, that virtue, honesty, hard work, and freedom are more likely to stem from the soil than from the pavement. This sentiment does not exist in China. There is no pride in the agrarian tradition. There's no pride in rural life. Rural people are called turen, which literally translates to earth or dirt people, but without any positive connotation of the word earth. It's a euphemism for uncouth and backwards. Most of the people left in rural China feel like they have failed. There is much to take pride in Huizhou's history, but a century and a half of war and revolution have destroyed the villagers' connection with their grand past and much of the culture that shaped village life. This is actually Mr. Wang, who I should name by name because he is, I would say, one of only 2 people who live in Bishan who maintain a strong connection with the history. He has studied and made maps of the region and really helped us learn a lot about the area. He's standing in front of some overgrown tombs here outside of Bishan, and no one really seems to know who is buried there. The distant gleaming cities have moved into this vacuum that a century and a half of war and revolution created. And no matter how harsh and alienating the reality may be, they hold the power right now in the villagers' minds and have deeply affected their ability to feel proud about the life that they're living.
If we look at the history of Back to the Land movement in America, we can see that it happened in the beginning of 20th century, which coincides with the shift in demography. America became 50% urban around 1910. And in China, that happened in 2011. It's around the same time that there's becoming a really popular trend of urbanites returning to the countryside, led by artists and intellectuals. They seek to break away from the predominant value system that equates urbanization with progress. And they want to experiment with alternative development models in the countryside. Our main character, Oning, founded this Bishan project with his friend Zuo Jing. Both are internationally successful art curators and editors working in Beijing before they moved to Bishan. And in 2013, Zuo Jing compiled this map of similar efforts across China. According to his estimates, there were about 50 similar projects in China, ranging from community supported agriculture to providing culture activities back in the rural area, or providing educational resource to the rural area. But this year, according to Oning's estimation, there's already been around 200 similar projects across China. And this project, funded by Oning and Zuo Jing, their angle in rural development is really to reactivate the cultural life in rural areas, so that people can have an identity, so that young people can feel attracted to live a life in the village. One of the most successful ongoing Back to the Land efforts is funded by this woman. So this is only one of the 200 projects we're talking about. This woman, her name is Shi Yan. In 2008, she was still a PhD student in the agriculture department of China's Renmin University. And she took a 6-month study leave to come to the United States. Specifically, she went to Earth Rice Farm in Madison, Minnesota. And this farm was a community-supported agriculture farm. And it was founded by 2 sisters, Kay and Anne Fernholz. And she was so thoroughly inspired. Shi Yan was so thoroughly inspired by her stay in the farm. When she went back to Beijing, she opened China's first CSA in the suburb of Beijing. It is called the Little Donkey Farm. You can see a little donkey here. And it soon became hugely successful. They now have, they're providing organic vegetables and meat to over 1,000 households in Beijing, and as their subscribed members. But in 2011, they can no longer meet the demand from Beijing. So Shi Yan actually opened a bigger farm in Tongzhou region of Beijing, which is further away from Beijing, the city area. And her husband, in the past 3 years, Chen Cunwang, he actually opened a chain brand of CSAs in southern provinces in China. Shi Yan is now the vice president of Urgency, which is the international association of CSA. Now back to Bishan village. This photo was taken in 2011, when our main character, Oning, on the far left, this side, is getting ready to launch the Bishan project with co-founder Zuo Jing on the far right. We're still working on the feature-length documentary.
I think I got these figures right this afternoon. I think, Yunfan, you said that in your village where you grew up in 1985, there were around 30,000 people?
Oh, in Shenzhen?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1978.
And 1978, and there are 12 million there today. That'd be like Brookings growing to 12 million in 30 years. I mean, it's chew on that a while. So a very complicated issue. So thank you for coming out this evening. I'm sure they'll be around if you want to come up and ask a question personally, but thanks for supporting the Pulitzer Center and our Phil Brandt lecture tonight. Thank you.